You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way.
So today, last session, we kind of talked about psychological safety and some of the components and things that were, critical to sort of laying the foundation for creating an opportunity to work smarter and not harder. And we kind of sort of talked about goals and the importance of goal setting. So I was thinking that could be our topic for today.
So critical.
Yeah. So, as organizations think about rehabbing, transforming, establishing culture, I think goals are critical. And what I've seen in my experience is that you have leaders who are so excellent and they get in there, they do their annual retreat and everybody gets together and there's all this innovation in the room of, senior level leaders creating these amazing goals for the organization. And inevitably, there's a meeting that says we had this meeting and here are the goals, but there's never any kind of follow-up after that, right? Around what do these goals mean to me? How do those actually apply to my work? So let's talk a little bit about the importance of cascading goals.
Yeah, cascading goals. And also, I think what you touched on too is like really sharing the why. Why are these goals important? Why should you care? How does this even relate to what your why is, to what you're purposeful and passionate about? We talk about like, we got the mission, we got the vision, we get the strategic initiatives and the goals and all the things, right? And we got to connect the dots and we got to keep that front and center. So how are we cascading all of those pieces, right? To really get folks every day to be knowing why, what their purpose is, why they're showing up, why they should care.
Yeah.
And that is what keeps people engaged.
It's so funny because I can remember working with some frontline leaders and people were showing up late all the time, and it was like, well, so-and-so's here. Why does it matter? Well, I'm only 15 minutes late. Why does that matter? And it's like, if you have a team not understanding why it's important that they show up on time, it means they don't understand their value to where the organization is going. And so it was a lot of work around you show up on time, because when you don't show up on time, here are the things that we miss. And I think sometimes I want to be respectful here, but sometimes we take a very punitive approach to you're late for work or, you didn't hit productivity numbers, and there's a very punitive approach to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that that's as effective as some managers might think it is, right?
I can't imagine it is. That seems like a huge demotivator to me, right? Don't we call that punishment? It's not even negative reinforcement. Maybe it is. Whip out that psychology book. But I'm pretty sure that's just punishment that we know doesn't work and doesn't motivate folks. But I think too, what you're touching on is the role modeling also. Like if people aren't seeing their value, right? One person's showing up late, and what does that say to everybody else? You don't value my time. And we all get stuck in this notion around time. I asked my group last week, pretty tongue in cheek. I try not to do too often where I'm like asking seriously leading questions, but I was like, how many of you guys here get paid per hour? Who's on the hourly? And they were looking at me like, no, none of us, right? I said, yeah, exactly. So let's not focus so much about what we're doing 8 to 5, right? And this, I think, comes right into working smarter, not harder. It's not about the time punch. We're not clocking in and out at 8 and leaving at 5. Like that's not the reality for many of us. This is what we talk about with work-life integration or whatever. Take the time when you need it. But not being, to your point, punitive about the time that we're showing up and, being so busy, like if every minute on your calendar isn't booked, then you're clearly not doing a good job.
You're not busy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Right. And busy has now equated to adding value.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
I was going to mention really quickly a book I read. Is it Simon Sinek who has the book is called Start With Why, and it's like, instead of going to this punitive road where you're telling people next time you're late you're going to be fired, if we go back to the other psychological safety, and actually helping people understand their value and how valuable they are to the company. Oh my God, you start to shift.
Right. Why being late is actually affecting other people, why it's affecting you. Why, and I might even take that a little bit further to say, why are you late? What can I do as your manager or leader to like help you with that? You got a kid at home, you got something going on, you got traffic's not good. I don't know. Now we don't have traffic, but whatever. Like what's the why behind that, right? And how can I help you? Not in a why are you late? But I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. I'm here to eliminate barriers for you.
Yep, that's exactly it. It's whys all around, right? It's that, like, I always like to say, the elevator at curious. So instead of the attack, it really becomes, help me understand what's going on. Help me understand. And this is sort of a tangent, and we don't have to necessarily go off into this, but it is sort of this new sort of environment of customized to each employee, right? Where are we meeting employees' needs instead of saying everyone has to be here at 7 a.m. because that's our policy. I didn't mean to say policy that way. Policies are good, but sometimes we get caught in policy.
Policies are just as good as the guardrails. They're guardrails, right? They're just as good as the exceptions we allow.
Right. But I think, obviously the thought just left and went out like there somewhere. So it's going to have to come back at some point.
Yeah, we'll get it. It'll come back.
But I think so. Inevitably, it's really being curious, asking the why, really looking at employees as individuals. And the idea, I think the old school idea that, well, we have to make it fair across the board is probably not where we're at today. It's really, when we talk about fairness, we talk about it should be fairness in terms of meeting each of these employees' needs.
Right. Fairness for what you need. Right. And I do love that too, when we talk even in the DE&I context also, right? Equitable versus equality.
Right.
Right. So it's giving people what they need.
Right.
Meeting them where they're at. So that's, and again, what we're here to talk about is how to make the business better, how to meet your business goals. And that is making sure that all of your folks are aligned and are clear on what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. Yeah. And if they're not, this is when the busyness comes into play, right? Because we're valuing the action, not actually meeting the goals.
Yeah. We ran an exercise with a client once where it was around, okay, let's just make a list of what you're doing every day. And so, and this isn't to say good or bad, this is just to understand what's the work. And so then it was, okay, we're going to make this list. Here's all the activity. And then they didn't know that the secondary piece of that was going to be like, okay, here are the 10 goals that the organization has. Help me understand how this aligns to that goal. And it was like, if the visual representation of heads exploding was that, it was like, oh yeah, because now we're saying, I don't actually care how busy you are. I don't care if you don't work 8 hours a day. I care about these goals getting met and how we can accomplish that. And so if you can do all that in 5 hours of work, go enjoy your 2.5 hours or whatever it is. Go be innovative and creative and start thinking of some other things that we might be able to do to drive value back to customers or employees or the business. So I think it's really fascinating because you're 100% spot on. People will have a full list of all of the stuff that they're doing. Mm-hmm. Very rarely can they tie that stuff back to actual physical goals of the organization.
Yeah. And I think too is like managers, or what I hear from a lot of managers and people leaders, they're like, well, we just want people to prioritize their own stuff. I want them to feel empowered to push back and say no. And,
Right.
okay. And yes, I agree with that. We do. That is what we want. But how are you giving them permission to do that?
Yeah.
Right. And having that conversation, just like you said, these are the goals. I don't really care how you get there. Is what you're doing associated, aligned to this goal? And if it's not, it's your job to raise your hand and say, help me, boss, leader, figure out where this is aligned. And if it's not, then does that mean we're not doing it? And so it becomes this more of a conversation than, oh, just, prioritize your work. Or I don't understand why people are so busy.
Right.
Right. Well, they're so busy because that's what you're placing value on.
Right. So in terms of when we're thinking about busy versus value or versus effectiveness, I think that we see, those things aren't always in alignment. And so really when we want to think about let me say it differently. For me, at the end of the day, when we're talking about working smarter and not harder, it really is determined by value. And that value has to be linked right back to what your organizational goals are.
Yeah. And so how are we making sure that everybody knows the goals for sure, inside and out, and what the work is that's associated with it, so they can say, yeah, no, that's not the work that's going to move the needle there.
Right.
That's not the work that's going to get us there. I mean, this is why I loved being a project manager, because it was like, here's what we do. And anything outside of that, we put a pin in it. Let's put a pin in it. That's to go to the parking lot. That's out of scope. I'm going to need a change order for that. Right. And like having that discipline though in our everyday to just say, how is what we're doing here, meeting that and creating that culture where it's everybody's responsibility to keep our eye on the prize.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of organizations will be confused as to why there's this work going on and this work going on and this work. And then all of a sudden now there's the battle for resources. That takes us into scarcity.
Right.
And you end up with all of these, sometimes I think organizations can get themselves into their own, lack of a better term, like cycle of crap. I don't know. Can I say that? Chaos.
Chaos. Yeah, thriving on the frenetic nature of the work, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I had a client who really struggled with this. He was like a relatively new people manager, and he had operational responsibilities and project responsibilities and a limited number of resources. And what I found, and I tried to help coach him through this, you're severely underestimating the amount of operational junk you have to do.
Right.
And that's mostly going to be there. Usually the same teams are the folks that have this work to do and have their goals to, this other more strategic long-term project type work, but again, even focusing on that operational stuff, like knowing your goals of, do we respond to customers in 24 hours, 48 hours? What are those KPIs? What's our SLAs? That was way too many acronyms, but
everybody knows them.
But what are those things so does this really need to get done right now, or can we push that back? Because what we see with folks is multitasking is a myth. You cannot keep moving back and forth from, I do this and I do that, then I get this call. The waste of energy and time, I'll just say time for now, that is involved in that makes you, not effective, mistakes happen, all the things there. So, again, being really clear about what the goals are, even for our operational work.
Yeah.
And these other, project initiative things. Like there's no, when I think when you and I talk about goals, there's really no distinction. It's all the work. And how are you focusing in the right direction on those things that are moving the needle?
That is what you just said, I think is so critical, because a lot of people do exactly what you started with was, well, we have the operational things and then we have the project things. But the problem is it's all the same people doing that work. So even as we think about goals and we think about even the setup of goals, you can't have 100 projects and this set of operations and then be shocked that your organization is overwhelmed and burnt out and making mistakes and can't get things done. We have to set some sort of idea of, hey, guess what? In Q1, these are the 5 things we want to get accomplished in Q1. Yeah. And then we're going to move on to what we want to get accomplished in Q2. Honestly, what we see more than anything is it's like we set the goals and it's like, okay, the goals start, January week, we come back and this is when the goals start and they hit everybody with all 25 goals. And it's like, well, one technique is to say, we're actually going to space these out. Yeah. And if as many projects do as sometimes operations, I mean, look, we literally had the zombie apocalypse where it blew up everybody's operations and everybody needed to reset, right? As things come up in our operations, we know, okay, what are the, even if they are goals that are set within these projects, what are the projects that are just going to get pushed back? Because we have to keep operations running anyway. So there always needs to be this level of understanding. That's why it's so important that everybody understands everything that the organization is trying to do. Yeah. I mean, we talked about silos kind of last week, but it's like, a silo in a situation like this where you're trying to move fast and you've got this thing going and you got these things going. I mean, it just creates absolute chaos. Those goals become so critical in the moments where you have to make these tough, hard decisions about what's going to get laid to the side because this unexpected thing came up. Yeah. And my favorite thing too, which we've seen 100 times, and as a project manager, it drove me nuts, but where we, the executive team or whomever, the powers that be, set the date for when something needs to be ready. And there are, I worked in healthcare and there's compliance things, and there are things that are mandated that do have a date. And so usually that takes precedent, of course. But backing into a date to just be like, okay, and we're going to meet this project on this day without actually checking in with the project teams, with the people doing the work, with the resources to know like, no, we have all this. That always cracks me up. And then again, we're playing catch up to, well, why didn't we meet that date? Well, because the date was never realistic in the first place. Right. So that too becomes like a mindset shift of, actually, why don't we let the project management process take its course, right? I worked for Ross Perot's company many, many moons ago, but I loved it because that is what we did, right? We had a whole framework around this is what it takes, that you get everybody in the room. What are you going to do? And then we set a timeline. And then does everybody know why we're doing this? Everybody, anything beyond this is now out of scope. And I know we just took like a massive detour into project management. We did. So but I think it all sort of aligns, because again, as we just talk about having a direction, everybody in the organization knowing the direction so that everyone is rowing their boat in that same direction. And when stormy roads, when storms hit, we all can create a plan for how we're going to adjust and move and, be flexible. I think that's, again, you have to create a space that's safe for folks, right? And the second thing is people have to know where they're going. If people don't know where they're going, it is utter chaos. So one of the things that I love to say to folks as we're thinking about setting goals is, can we first just start by making sure goals are achievable? Because a number of times there is a group of people who set a goal, and you just mentioned they actually don't talk to anybody that has to actually be accomplishing the goals. There is no consulting with the folks that on time frame, on what's reasonable, on what resources are going to be needed, anything like that. And you set this goal, and then we really start to begin to set people up for failure. So making sure that goals are achievable, and I'm going to add this piece in them, are time bound. So that then
smart.
When you put time, yeah, smart goals. When you put a time on them, and then everyone can see, oh my gosh, everything's due in Q1, that then even then helps to reset everybody's expectation. So goals are achievable, and some sort of time frame around them to just help us with prioritization.
Yeah, no, I like that you're talking about that too. And like, how do we keep them front and center, right? How do we keep talking about them? How are they always there, right? We have on everybody's homepage, it's their mission, it's their vision, their long-term strategy, right? So are we putting that same attention into people like visibly seeing what's going on? What are the goals? What are we marching towards? You know, whether that's in a status report every week, in the newsletters, in our monthly or quarterly all hands, you know, how are we keeping that front and center and creating that space for folks to just say, okay, having that, maybe it's not even creating the space. It's like, what's the process? What's the checkpoints that we do those activity lists versus what's actually moving the needle, right? When we're feeling too busy, how are we resetting to say, okay, what do I take off the plate? What do I take off the plate? And also, like, you can't have 10 goals. It's like having 10 priorities. You know, especially if you've got the same teams doing that, right? I mean, that's just, maybe you're in an organization where you're lucky enough and you've got folks doing this, some more the goals or whatever, but usually not. Usually not. But yeah, how are we keeping them front and center to make sure, like you said, that everybody is rowing in the same direction and that we are well versed and that everybody can recite them, right? Like, it's a little bit drink the Kool-Aid, right? But you can say the mission and why you're doing, you know, why you work for this organization. The same should be true for the goals. Like, what are the big boulders you're moving this year? What are you trying to work on? And again, when you can feel that, embody that, then that becomes your why, not just the organization's why.
For sure.
You know?
I mean, and then, you know, when people have a sense of what their contribution is, it keeps them engaged and excited about doing this work. So I love that. I love that it shouldn't just be financial metrics that are shared in these all hands kind of meetings, but actually the work of the work. Like, let's talk about the work of the work. Give some space for that. So I think in addition to these like broad kind of, you know, organizational, you know, all hands kind of meetings, department or otherwise, like, how are they visible to you each day? What is the breakdown? I mean, the actual physical breakdown of what needs to be accomplished today to move us towards whatever the end state is, right? I talk about this a lot with in-process metrics. So many times people will have these, like, you know, I used to call them your $1 million target. And it's like, well, I'm in January and we make 1 cent a day. $1 million seems like a universe away. So what do I need to do today that gets me towards that $1 million, you know? So I think these, you know, not just the broad goals that need to be shared regularly, but really down to the person themselves. What is it that this person, this individual, maybe this individual team.
Well, I think that's why Agile is so successful, right? Because you got your scrums every morning. We're all together. We're talking about what are we doing to move the needle? You know, what obstacles, what's getting in your way? What can I do to help? You know, it becomes that more team camaraderie and keeping it on track, right? And if we see or hear somebody's like, oh, I got this to do. And it was like, then again, it becomes everybody's responsibility to go, bring it back. Yeah. You know, how is that? What is that doing to support this goal? Because it's easy to do, right? Especially when we are passionate about something, which we hope everybody is, then you're like, whoa, but this would be so cool too. And I'm so passionate and now we're in that frenetic state again.
Yep.
Did you ever read the book Essentialism?
I'm almost done with it. I'm currently in the process
Oh, right.
of reading it. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely was like, I don't want to be overly dramatic and say life changing, but it was it was an eye opener for me, and again, I think for me, it just came back to the value,
Yep.
right? If the value is not being busy and always saying yes to stuff, always doing the things, whatever the thing was, then I wasn't really clear on what my value was. And it turns out actually my value was a lot more impactful when I could clear away the noise for other people and just say, no, here's the 2 priorities, here's the things, and we're going to have a better outcome because of it. All this other stuff, really, it is noise.
You just hit it on the head. You have to create a culture where busy is not the value. Yeah. Busy cannot be the value. And that's a difficult transition for folks, right? Full calendar.
It is. You ask people, right? How are you doing? I'm so busy.
So busy.
Like that's the answer all the time. And if you don't say that, it's almost like, well, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean you're good?
Yeah.
What do you, you gotta be busy. We wear that like a badge of honor, right? I'm so busy. Look how important I am. I'm just so busy. Yeah. When I was chief of staff in my last corporate job, I knew I was in a position where people were watching me more, like I had more informal influence that way. And I was like, I am making it my mission that when somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm not going to say busy. They see what I produce. They know my output. They see emails and stuff and things coming out of my office. Like I provide value. Yeah. I don't need to prove that with using I'm so busy to look frenetic or chaotic. People decide, are you contributing, without me saying that. So I made it a point to be like, no, however I'm feeling, that's not going to be the answer. Maybe I'm feeling frenetic because I'm bouncing from thing to thing. Maybe I'm feeling disorganized. That's how I'm doing. But busy was not going to be my response. So that was my, I'm going to move the needle one elevator conversation at a time.
I love that. And what's interesting that you mentioned in there is people know what I'm doing. People know the work I'm producing. And I think that's another tip, right? It's around sharing. Let's make sure we're sharing what everybody's doing, because then it becomes very clear for everyone on what value this team is bringing versus that team, where we might have opportunities to share stuff together, where we might have opportunities to leverage some of these good things that are happening on other teams. So really, I think sharing in these victories, and quite honestly, the non-victories. Like you said, sometimes I'm disorganized and I need to share that too, because I want to get some help from someone who can help me clear some things, get some things back in order, or whatever that might be. So really, I think, if we look sort of at what are the takeaways, I think we've got to make goals achievable and time bound, because that gives us a way to prioritize.
So SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, right?
And that's it. If everyone just followed SMART goal setting, we would have no problems in the world.
Well, as long as they were shared. As long as everybody understood them and understood their role in them.
Exactly.
Right.
So achievable and
SMART
is critical. I think talking about them, making them part of your regular agendas with all your broad organizational meetings, being able to tie those goals down to the individual, to the person who is sitting in front of their monitor doing whatever it is that they need to be executing.
Everybody should see themselves in the goals.
Everybody.
Nobody should be like, I'm operational. No, then you don't have the right goals.
Well, that's my favorite.
It's
like,
not doing the right work.
I'm not sales. So I'm like, no. But we're all sales. Like
we're all sales.
We're all sales. But yes, every person needs to see themselves in the goals. So I think keeping those goals visible on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, sharing, making sure we're sharing all of it, the good, the ugly,
Mhm.
the in between, whatever that is, really sharing those as part of the organization.
And you know what's coming up for me when you talk about sharing the good and the ugly, but also like creating that compassion too, right? Because we're all working on stuff, all things that are hard, and I need this from you. And, there's so many interdependencies. We're not really working in silos. Like, we might not be sharing information, and that's our silo, but I totally need you and you need me and all these things, because the work just doesn't happen that way. But when you can see across the organization what all the goals are, what all the teams are working on, where there's struggles happening, where there's victories, then to be able to have some compassion for, oh, I now see why Bob didn't get back to me in like 12 hours. He's usually so responsive, but and so that just again continues to breed the culture that people are more engaged and you're motivated. And when you're connected to the goals in each other, then this is what people stay for. I feel connected to my coworker. This is what retention's about. So
right. And that gets
we're all
us to
succeeding together.
That gets us to working a little bit smarter. Yeah. Working smarter, not being concerned about busy, just working smarter and being effective and getting those wins.
Yeah. Well, so while our friends that are listening are working on cascading their goals and making sure that they're smart and everyone on their team knows their why and feeling connected to it, we will be thinking about how to share our continued thoughts on creating a problem-solving workforce. So next time we get together, we'll be talking about how we're empowering people to be agile, to make decisions, and and again, we're working smarter, not harder.
I love this conversation. This is my favorite time of the week, Rachel.
So fun. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to